As we take a couple of these deep breaths, I will just share a little bit of gratitude. Just first and foremost, just thank you for being here with me. Thank you for sharing this, digital space together. I'm just going to put a prayer out to the world and to the ethers to allow what messages may need to come forth from our hearts and to hold our hearts in a seat of service and in a seat of gratitude. And also to just give a lot of thanks to anybody who may come in and find this episode, find our conversation, our dialogue, and may that be of value, may that be of service to them as well. So that's my prayer for this time, and thanks for being here. And welcome to the Psychedelic Passage podcast. My name is Jimmy Nguyen, your host. It's with the full heart that I show up here in service to you all, and thanks to anybody who's come across this podcast. It is late or early September 2025, and I find that in the conversations that we have been having with our community here at Psychedelic Passage and just with our friends and family and loved ones, I recognize that there is a lot of uncertainty out there in the world today. I recognize that there's a lot to take in, I'll say. And I also just acknowledge and know that there can be a lot to be upset about. There's a lot to feel pain and suffering from. And without diminishing that suffering, I hope that each and every one of you can find your sense of groundedness, your sense of calm, your sense of stillness almost in like the eye of the storm. And if any of you find yourself struggling or in challenge or in conflict, whether internally or externally or with the world at large, my prayer is that you have community, that you find community, that you lean on community. And if you are one of those that don't feel like you have community and that you're alone and that you're, isolated, just know there's likely somebody who cares. At least I care, and if I can care and our community can care, then maybe that can be a symbol that there's some way that you can feel that care, as well. So I just wanted to start with that before we dive into our episode today, because I don't want to be an individual who, I was telling my team the other day, like, I'm not going to pretend that everything that's happening here with Psychedelic Passage and psychedelics is like the most important in the world. There's a lot of important things happening. And so I hope that we get to hold this all in the right containers and in the right way that can possibly create a world where we can be more understanding. We can help each other's, healing processes. And one of my favorite phrases in psychedelic work is to help walk each other home. So thanks for joining me here. I am super excited about today's episode. We have a guest here, and I'll do a little bit of an intro as well. So we have Dr. Glauber Assis, who is a researcher of sacred plants and their traditions. Glauber has a PhD in sociology from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. I might have mispronounced that a little. He's the author of numerous articles and book chapters, co-editor of the book Women and Psychedelics, Uncovering Invisible Voices. Glauber is the founder and president of Seu da Divina Estrella, a legal and Texas at Santo Daime church. He has 15 years of experience with ayahuasca, hape, other sacred plants, and has built this practice in dialogue with local Brazilian ayahuasca community and with the blessing of indigenous elders and activists in Brazil. He's also the co-founder of Jornadas de Cura, which we'll chat about today, a plant medicine center in Brazil that promotes an alliance between the ceremonial use of sacred plants, public education on plant medicine, and then also psychedelic science. So that's a really great, bridge across some of those worlds there. Glauber is an indigenous rights activist and also the director of the Psychedelic Parenthood community, and is the father of 3 children and lives with his wife, Jacqueline Rodriguez, in Santa Lucia, Minas Gerais, Brazil. I think I got to take some lessons. You can like share with me some. Maybe I got to go like trilingual here and maybe pick up a little Portuguese or Spanish or something. But welcome, Glauber. It's a real honor to have you here.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. I feel so honored. I'm calling in from Santa Luzia, Brazil, at my place. And I feel so blessed to have the opportunity to share with you, to hear from you. And I also would like to say hello to all the people who are listening to us today.
Yeah, we were connected through a mutual friend, somebody who I also believe is a big bridge in the different sectors of how the human interaction and relationship with psychedelics occur. Sean McAllister. Sean holds a very special place in my heart. He's also the one of the co-authors of Colorado's like Prop 122 and the Natural Medicine Health Act. And Sean and I had met in a couple of different ways, but we really spent time together at Burning Man a few years back, and I think that that's what really like solidified our like brotherhood and connection. And I remember earlier this year, Sean and I were having a little bit of a catch up, and we were having this dialogue about how do we make sure that we don't forget the past and then bring the legacy of psychedelic work into the future, which in my belief, comes from the indigenous and cultural aspects of all of this. And we were talking about like, okay, there's kind of the stuff that's happening in America with psychedelics, and then people very much view like psychedelic tourism a little bit separately in Mexico and South America, like Peru and Brazil. And then Sean's like, you got to meet my friend Glauber. You got to meet my friend Glauber. So I remember you and I just started by exchanging a couple, voice memos here and there. And I was like, Glauber's my people. Glauber's my people. And so I'm just really honored to have you here, just for you to just share your wisdom and your knowledge and, your message. I think over time, I've been just really inspired by how you carry yourself, inspired by what I see as your values and the way that you live your life. And so if you ever need a hype man, like somebody to intro you into any events, just know that I'm like really up for it. But I wonder if you could just share with our audience and our community just a little bit about you, maybe how your relationship with psychedelics came to be, and then maybe how that brought us to this current time today.
Yes, Jimmy. Wow, so many. Although we met recently, I have so
Yeah,
many beautiful memories already with you, like voice memos, but also when we met at Psychedelic Science 25. It was a
really
very
powerful. Mhm.
special moment with our indigenous elders there consecrating rapé. And yeah, so my name is Glauber, which is a very interesting name for a Brazilian to have because actually this is a German name.
Mm,
There's a salt, chemical element that is called Glauber salt. And then very poor black woman from the state of Bahia, she saw this written in a class of chemistry, and she decided to baptize her son as Glauber. So he eventually turned into one of the most prolific and important Brazilian filmmakers. And he wanted to have a revolution in movies that would be also aesthetic. And then my father, my mother, they loved his movies and cinema. That's why they baptized me as Glauber, but it's not a common name in Brazil.
mm,
And the same thing with my trajectory, because I was born and raised in a very conservative town in the south of Minas Gerais state, in the southeast of Brazil. And despite being, in my opinion, the most psychedelic country in the world, because in Brazil we have not only synthetic compounds, but a lot of psychedelic plants, psychedelic animals, different psychedelic cultures, hundreds of indigenous languages. Brazil is still, in general, a very conservative society. So the Catholic Church here is super strong. The evangelicals, they are gaining more and more and more power. So I was born and raised in this conservative culture, and I didn't feel really adapted to that until I had a chance to discover myself going to the Amazon rainforest about 20 years ago. So that's why when I started consecrating the medicines. And then I realized that Brazilian history goes far beyond the importation of culture from the Northern Hemisphere. So I decided also to start engaging in relationship with my friends from other countries as well. So I never wanted actually to go to the global north, for example, but I understood that although, despite being very different, we have different cultures, we are also an immigrant, there's something that connects us no matter where we are. That is community, that is love, that is caring for people, that is this existential condition of suffering because of all the inequalities that we have in the whole world. So I also started engaging with different friends. And then I wanted also, this is something that called my attention. Like when I drank for the first time ayahuasca, I was like overwhelmed by grace, gratitude, happiness. And these called my attention on the spiritual level, but also the intellectual level. So I wanted to understand better Brazilian history, to make peace with the history of Brazil, to understand ayahuasca lineage. And then I started also doing research on ayahuasca. And then I became a member of the Santo Daime family, the Santo Daime sisterhood. But I wasn't really happy about how plant medicine they're growing in the urban centers. I wanted to be more connected with the forest, with the roots of these traditions. So I decided to go to the Amazon rainforest, and then, like, magic happened. I really wanted to be more connected. I started attending ceremonies every week here in Brazil.
It's a lot of work.
A
That's a
lot of
lot of
work.
work. Yeah.
I met my wife in a ceremony here. We went together to the Amazon just for fun, to see the forest, to be there with the local communities. And then when we asked the elder of the Santo Daime tradition, like, what can we do in order to really support? And he said, you want to support? Okay, so here we go. And he gave us 11 liters of ayahuasca. And that's when we started having our own tax exempt church in Brazil, which now has been here for 10 years. So all my
Mm,
children, they were also born in our community here, in our culture. And since then, plant medicine has been my biggest teachers, and also showed me that this is the path I wanna walk, not only a mystical one, but also and especially a social one that can be meaningful and can be walked with integrity, in the sense that it can support other people, creating my own community.
mm. Talk to me a little bit more about that path that you want to walk. I mean, I'm hearing a little of it, and you've given me so much like rich background into you that I already have more, questions, which I'll note. But I'm a little curious about what is that path for you? What is involved there, and what do you think is to be discovered or solved in that path for you?
Mhm. Well, thank you for this question. I believe it's a very deep one. And I think there are many layers there, including a civilizational one. Because here in Brazil, usually we are taught when we are part of the working class, because my parents, they are really hard workers, they don't have a lot of money. They suffered a lot also in their lives. So we are expected just to be an employee, to work for another people, and we are raised just watching like soap operas and Hollywood movies. And there's always this weird feeling of not belonging to this planet, of not belonging to this society, of
Mm,
not being connected with religion, politics, and what's going on here. So
mm,
I always brought this kind of existential anxiety about finding myself and about having a meaningful life. And then when I wanted to be, this is kind of funny, but I wanted to be an MMA fighter when I was an adolescent. And then I took ayahuasca for the first time, and I was knocked down by ayahuasca. And this was the first vision that I had, that my battle was not in an octagon, like, was actually a different one that
mm,
was more connected to bringing meaning, first of all, to my own life, then to my family, then to my friends, and then to my
Mm,
community. And then I was suffering a lot in this specific experience with ayahuasca. And then I look at around me, and people, instead of being mad or criticizing, they were just happy that I was leaving that moment. And then this guy is still one of my best friends, almost 20 years later. This guy was just smiling at me. And I was, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm so happy that I can be here for you. And
mm,
then I felt this very rare feeling that people were caring about me. So
mm,
this was like the trigger for me to be a member of the plant medicine field in Brazil, the ayahuasca field in Brazil, because I realized that instead of just buying things from outside, instead of just focusing on ourselves, we could have more meaning in our lives if we are part of a community, and not like an artificial community, but a community that we can co-create. So this is what I really like, and this also has something to do with a counterculture, with sociology, but also with family, is that we have a role to play. We are not just consumers. We are not just here, just walking for no reason, for no purpose. We are here also to make a difference. So there is space for creativity. There's space also for committing mistakes. And then we learn from the mistakes and we commit
yeah.
better
Yeah.
mistakes. So we when we started our church, we didn't start a church just to follow the protocols. We started the church because then we could do something different. So that's why we are very happy that in our church we received for the first time as an official member trans men in the Santo Daime community,
Mm,
the first wedding party, official wedding party in the Santo Daime field here in Brazil between two women
mm,
was also held in our community here. So we like to balance this. Like, I think there's a very beautiful indigenous expression that says the future is ancestral. So not forgetting, but remember who we are, where we came from, but also doing our own part to open the path for the next generation. So we like to follow the traditions, but also to bring our own flavor, so to speak, because we believe that there are so many things to still be done. And this amazing dance of life is so, so beautiful that instead of just consuming and consuming, we can also co-creating. So that's the philosophical idea, so to
sure.
speak, about this path.
Yeah, and for those in the audience who may be curious, Santo Daime, to my understanding, and I'm certainly not an expert here. There are a lot of like influences that are drawn from many various cultural and almost like religious aspects as well. So you'll see some elements of kind of what they call like folk Catholicism, which can be, Christian influence, and then some more, like indigenous aspects, and then also somewhat of like a spiritual and like animism approach as well. And so I don't know much about Santo Daime works, but when I think about folks talking about ayahuasca and then speaking to some of the lineages that come through, like ayahuasca work. Certainly, Santo Daime is well regarded and well mentioned. And then also, there's different expressions of that, right? And different leaders and containers. What I hear you say, and I want to draw back to a couple of important notions that you made, but what I hear you say is that in starting that church, it wasn't just to like follow, like you said, the protocols. I hear that it was really to create a container of which humanity can occur. And then within humanity, there can be community, there can be mistakes, there can be rupture and repair. And I think it's really, exciting to hear that the capacity for that, the availability to that is not just exclusive to certain people who have certain identities and certain things. And so that's really inspiring. I want to touch upon something that you had said, which definitely relates to my life. And I think that my belief is that when you're talking about this existential anxiety, that it probably comes in many ways, shapes, and forms. But I believe that this is a facet of just the human experience. And so I did a podcast episode recently about like individual or group, experiences and how like our societies and our family units and our cultures and our countries even influence that. Like there are some countries like America where the individual is really honored. And then there are some other cultures and societies where the collective is really honored and it weaves in between. But regardless of where folks sit, I think the questions of who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? And what's my purpose? I would imagine is something that every human comes across. And so I just like hear that very, deeply. And you're probably introducing some terms that our audience may be a little unfamiliar with: global north, global south. I've spoken about like the Western kind of approach to mental health and spiritual health and emotional health and healing versus, people kind of like group together like indigenous psychedelic use as this like kind of like big glob all together. But there's actually very many different, approaches and cultural history here. That inspires me with what you're saying because I do feel like, regardless of how individuals' intentions show up, I think it does fall into those deeper, like existential questions. And I think a lot of folks seek psychedelics to be like, is what I'm doing, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? You know? And I think that there can be a lot of deep questions as a part of that.
Yes, I agree with you. And yeah, I loved everything that you said. There's something that United States citizens, they understand a lot that I think also might help why I also chose this path and why I love this path. That is freedom.
Mm,
If I could summarize this decision about having a church and having my family also in a community, I would say that this is also about freedom because we are always talking about freedom and being free, and we have this opposition between individual and collective freedom and everything. But actually, when we start thinking and bringing these philosophical questions that I consider also to be very, very important, no matter where we are, no matter what we are doing for our business, in our job and everything, it's still important to ask these very simple and very brutal questions.
mhm,
Why I'm doing this? Who am I? And so on. So actually, if we are spending many hours of our day in social media, for example, we might have a feeling that we are free to have our own thoughts. But in fact, we are so influenced by external agendas, external ideologies. So what I really believe that plant medicine in general, they can help us with is to recover this power to think by our own, So
mm,
I believe
mhm.
that when we can do this, we can also see there is no opposition between being an individual and being a member of a community, for example.
Yeah, I think it's the freedom of thinking for yourself and questioning, and then even coming into internal questions about, is thinking for myself influenced by other things like the influence of our family or our beliefs or culture or religion or society or country, because it all adds into the ways that we regard our own, something that I really love, our own autonomy and our own, agency. And so that's been one of the biggest things for me, is to understand like what are my own thoughts versus what are things that may have been ingrained within me, and that there's no right or wrong. It's just asking the question goes a really long way. And then for there, it can come into, well, what do I actually believe? What do I actually value? What does matter to me as well? And so I think it's a little funny in America with the way that folks approach psychedelics, and for no fault of people's own, and for very good reason, by the way. But I find that people are looking to heal or to fix or to relieve some type of pain and suffering within themselves. So something that you said before really aligns with what I share all the time. And these are not my thoughts, my own original thoughts. Like, these are all influenced by psychedelic experiences and teachers and all of that. But I view psychedelics as relational. And I know that you do too. And I've heard you say this in other, podcasts and things, but it's not only how we relate to the medicine, but how we relate to ourselves. And if
Mhm.
we can find a way to relate to ourselves, the good, the bad, the in between, the light, the dark, the stuff that we love about ourselves, the stuff that we really don't like about ourselves, then perhaps then that can allow us to relate to our loved ones and then our communities, and then relate more to the world, which is like pretty similar to what you were saying, before. And so I find it pretty interesting when then we regard a more, what I would frame as in the pool of like indigenous approaches to this, is that it's not that the individual doesn't matter, but there's also a regard for the collective
Mhm.
at the same time.
Mhm.
And so what I share with folks is like, okay, you go into a psychedelic experience and you feel better. Or you go into the psychedelic experience and it brings up things that you then work through, and then you get to your emotional target. And then what? And then what?
Mhm.
What
Yes.
from there? So I wonder if there's something on your mind as I'm just kind of chatting and talking a little bit.
Yes, definitely. There's this famous quote from the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. He says that the reality is relational. So it's not a matter of not being influenced because we want to be in relation, but about having the capacity to see this, to be aware that we are not just, like isolated. And then we can make our own decisions about who are our allies, who are our friends. Sometimes they're so desperate about earning money, for example, or having a good position in our job that we forget that we can also be related to the trees, to the animals, that we can also listen to the voices, not only from tech bros or Elon Musk, but we can also hear the voices of birds, the bald eagle, this cosmic, amazing relationship that we have. Like every single day, we receive this alien force from the heights, from the cosmos, from the sun that is actually feeding all the plants. So that's what I mean when people talk about expansion of consciousness. And then I think this is also because you mentioned this two interesting concepts of answering questions and asking questions.
Mm.
And I do use OpenAI a lot. I think artificial intelligence has an important role nowadays, but also the other AI, ancestral intelligence,
Ah.
still has a very important role to play. So actually, now answers are very abundant. You can have answers from ChatGPT every single moment that you want to, but to have good questions, that's an important thing to do. So, for example, just to exemplify my point here, you're talking about depression. Thousands and thousands of people around the world, they are suffering from depression now. And many people are very desperate. But if we ask important questions about the roots of this, we might find different narratives. And then we might also not be so attached to a single narrative about public health, mental health, healthcare, and everything. Because, for example, if millions of people they're suffering from depression now, there's also an important civilizational component, right?
Hmm. I love what you were saying about the parallel of AI, and I really like that term, ancestral intelligence. Thank you for that. And I find this a really interesting, point, because I'm going to lead to a question because I wrote this down like right in the beginning. It's a perfect time to, ask this now. I admittedly myself, I'm a millennial, and we were one of the few who like understood what it was like before computers and internet and after computers and internet. So I have like a different lens. Some of my team members call me Peepaw, like a grandpa. So like
Oh, yeah.
I'm not like the most, foremost like expert to comment on this. But as I was venturing into AI, it's this interesting thing. And I find there's an interesting parallel to psychedelic use. Because with AI, I was like, oh, it can open up so much capacity. It can increase your tools and you can do things so much better and more efficiently. You have all this access of information to you. And then when I started to use it, and I was cautious, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to give all of my power away to this thing. I still want to think for myself, right? And when I started to use AI, I noticed a couple of things. One is that the way, at least like OpenAI is written, is there is a massive emphasis on telling you what you want to hear. And I think as a part of that, there still needs to be a verification. And sometimes, and they call it like AI hallucinations, where it will just like make up facts or it will tell you something, be like, yup, this is right. And here's a citation. And then when you ask them or challenge the citation, it's like, oh, you were right. I made that up. I'm sorry. I won't do that again. And the next week, if you ask it to think, it's going to do it again. So there is this like funny, interesting thing with AI. They call it AI hallucinations. I think the same thing applies to psychedelics because I think that when folks are suffering so much, it can be easy to give away your power to this. I'm using air quotes here, this external thing, though I believe that there is a very much like internal kind of what I call like shared consciousness and intelligence when we connect with, psychedelics. And so I find that really fascinating because folks are now starting to use AI a little bit in psychedelic works. Folks are starting to use AI as their stand-in mental health providers, their attorneys, and all of those things. And we're also seeing people doing that in a very unhealthy way, in a way that negatively affects, their, mental health and things like that. So it's a pretty interesting parallel that what's happening in like cutting edge technology and this like modern technical world that we are in
Yeah.
is probably similar to things that have been happening for probably hundreds and maybe thousands of years. So my question for you, I'm going to wrap this all in a question. One of my favorite things to pick apart is when folks do ayahuasca and they say, well, grandma told me this or ayahuasca told me that. And so I'm just going to go do it. One of the best things that I heard at a psychedelic science conference led by MAPS back in the early summer, I was watching this panel across indigenous generations. So they invited in folks, of indigenous lineage to America. And one of the guys, I think his name was Lewis, he was like, ayahuasca told me, or plant medicine told me. And he said, well, plant medicine doesn't speak English, so you may just want to question what you're hearing. You know what I mean? So I'm curious what you think about when people are like, ayahuasca told me, or grandma told me, or folks who maybe are like looking for answers through psychedelic work.
Wow, that's a beautiful, deep question. And yeah, short comment before I dive deep into what you said. I was passing through a dieta in the Yawanawa village in January this year. And then one of the elders there was talking about how indigenous languages are important because according to him, the spirits of the forest, they don't speak Portuguese either. So
Mm,
this is also goes beyond this individual responsibility, which is very important and central, but also touch on the topic of indigenous rights and why protecting indigenous biocultures is also important. Because if we detach the relationship that we have with plant medicine from indigenous traditions, we are losing much more than we can imagine, including this ability to talk to the spirits. This on the one hand. On the other hand, and that's one of the reasons I like this parallel between artificial intelligence and ancestral intelligence is that this is have you ever watched that movie Gravity?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh yes,
Uh,
that's I like
Oh,
that one with Sandra Bullock and George
yeah.
Clooney. So that's a turning point in sci-fi, I do believe, because I was raised like watching these movies that people trying to reach other planets and trying to travel in the light speed to reach different galaxies and everything. And this movie is different. It's like they are struggling a lot to return to Mother Earth, to our own planet. And I
Mm,
believe this is a nice metaphor about what we need to do in the psychedelic field now. We need to return. We need to go back home. And this includes planet Earth, includes being not alienated and understand that we are also nature. And by the way, in many indigenous languages, they don't have a precise name for nature because they don't consider that nature is something that is apart from us. And I'm telling this because lots of people, they are, so to speak, fetishizing the experience with these two modalities of technology. So I also
mm,
like to understand plant medicine, psychedelics as technologies, ancestral forms of technologies, ancient forms of technologies that are also very modern. But this is to say that ChatGPT is going to mirror your own personality, like the way that you prompt it, the things that you say there. Because if I use my ChatGPT, I will receive specific answers. And then if you let me use your phone, ChatGPT is going to provide me different answers for
mm,
the same questions,
mhm,
which means that we have very important role in this relationship with AI. And the
mm.
same thing is happening now with psychedelics in general and plant medicine in particular. People are fetishizing them in the sense that they don't understand that it's about themselves too. It's about their intentions. It's about what they bring with them. And I do believe that this is an important topic because yes, we all remember when people they had that Capitol storm when Joe
Yep.
Biden was elected. And then this is an interesting thing because a lot of those guys they were also psychedelic supporters. Jake Angeli, the most famous of them.
Oh yeah, what was he was like he claimed himself to be a shaman and he wore
Yeah,
like the
Shara
buffalo thing and
was
the
also
QAnon shaman, I think he
yeah,
said he was or something.
and it's also like he was serving peyote. So my point here is psychedelics detached from human cultures. They're not going to save the world. They are not a panacea that are going to heal everything and anything. They're not going to bring all the downloads that we need. There's also very, very important thing to acknowledge that is our own empowerment and role in our experience.
Okay, folks, so that wraps up part 1 of 2 of my conversation with Dr. Glauber Assis. As you can tell, we had so much to talk about, so many interesting things about bridging the world between indigenous and sacred use of psychedelics, and then the modern and future use of psychedelics as it pertains to our society. And so please tune in on the next episode with Dr. Glauber Assis as we dive into the rest of our conversation together.